Hello again, Greenfin people. All right, let us get into day 2. With me today, I'm pleased to have 2 lovely humans, Elizabeth Seeger, board member at the ISSB. Probably a lot of you know her from her days at KKR. And Kerstin Lopatta, vice chair of EFRAG and professor of accounting, auditing, and sustainability at the University of Hamburg. There was some news yesterday, probably saw it. The ISSB, International Sustainability Standards Board, launched their first 2 finalized standards. So question for you, first Elizabeth, what kind of reaction are you hearing and seeing so far?
Well, first of all, congratulations on an amazing conference. I think there's a lot of people in here. The lights are so bright. I'm only imagining. Oh, thank you. I see somebody waving in the darkness. I appreciate it. And also want to thank you for having me here. I think one of the main questions I get when I speak to our stakeholders here in the US is, okay, great, congratulations on all that, but what about the ESRSs and how do they overlap or not? So it's really great to be here with Kerstin, so thank you for that. So yeah, yesterday was a really exciting day. We launched our so-called S1 and S2. We're very creative names. That stands for Standard 1 and Standard 2. And honestly, I haven't had even a chance to take a look at the feedback we've been getting because it was so exciting and you know, it's all over the world we're having these great events. But for those of you who don't know, or as a reminder, the standards themselves were created in response to market demand. And the ISSB itself was created in response to market demand and was announced at COP26. Yeah, COP26 only just over a year and a half ago, with the exposure drafts of S1 and S2 being put out in the spring of 2022. And since that time, the board, which I joined in November as a full-time independent member, has been deliberating the feedback that we got from 1,400 different letters from various stakeholders. Many of you are here. And so just really quickly on what is S1 and S2, and then I'll pause and happy to answer more questions later. But S1, which is our general requirements document, the way that I describe it is it brings the discipline of accounting to a very undisciplined space, which is sustainability disclosures. And it introduces concepts such as connectivity and balance and fair representation, and also requires that companies communicate about their sustainability-related risks and opportunities throughout their value chain to their investors in a way that's decision useful for their investors. It also requires industry-specific disclosures and references the SASB standards, which are now part of the ISSB standards. And S2 is our climate standard, where we give requirements as it relates to disclosing to investors on climate-related risks, including transition and physical risks, and then climate-related opportunities as well. And so the 2 of them really fit together and are just the starting point, really. First of all, our first standards, but not the end of the work there. And also a real beginning, because now I used to say my former employer, or I didn't say it, my former employer said it all the time, now the hard work begins, right? The standards are here, now we need to use them. And this is really a turning point for all of us, I think we're all really excited about.
Awesome. And before I forget, if you have questions after this, you can't ask them now, but later today, Elizabeth and her colleague Andrew Brenner, who I see sitting studiously in the front, will be doing an Ask Me Anything session with Joel McCower. So if you have questions, come and ask anything, and they will answer anything.
Almost anything.
Almost anything, that's true. Limitations. Kerstin, EFRAG has published set 1 of the ESRS. That's a chunky sentence. So first, can you describe what EFRAG does to some in the audience who might not know, what ESRS is, and then tell us a little bit about what you're hearing during the consultation period?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. And thanks also for the invitation that I can be here. Yeah, I'm the vice chair of the EFRAG SRB. So EFRAG is the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, and the SRB is the Sustainability Reporting Board. And the Sustainability Reporting Board was set up last year in April, and I joined them, and I was the acting chair, and I delivered set 1, as you just said. Set 1 is the first set of European Sustainability Reporting Standards. That's the ESRS. And we delivered to the European Commission last year in November 12 standards, 2 so-called cross-cutting standards. That's comparable to what Elizabeth just described. So we have one general requirements and one general disclosure standard, which covers almost everything in the standard setting process. And then we have 10 so-called topical standards in environmental, social, and governance. And EFRAG was mandated by the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Disclosure, directive, not disclosure, directive to develop those standards and to deliver them to the European Commission. And they worked on, or they revised the standards after we developed them. And they came out 2 weeks ago for another comment period of 4 weeks, which will last 2 weeks. And the main difference to what Elizabeth was just describing is that in the European area, we also focus next to financial materiality to impact materiality. So the main difference, what you just said for S2 is your standards, ours is E1 for environmental, and then 1 is climate. The huge difference is that we not only have risk and opportunities, we also have the I for impact. So it's IROS called for impact, risk, and opportunities. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Elizabeth and Bita, Kerstin, for setting the context here. That's an important word I want to get back to, materiality. But another phrase that's important, global baseline. I think I can speak for the people here when they say they've had enough soup. When it comes to alphabet soup, they're full. So how are your two organizations working together to build that global baseline? And maybe we'll start with Kerstin, since you were just here.
Yeah, so the global baseline is coming from the ISSB, so Elizabeth might a little bit talk about that. So the idea is that the ISSB is setting a so-called global baseline, which comprises some basic information, and then jurisdiction will set up on that. So that means in my context of the EU, so the IFRS, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, they should be more specific in the jurisdiction. So that is a global baseline, so to say, right, Elizabeth? So maybe you would like to add on that?
Yeah, no, I think that we use the term global baseline a lot. Thank you for adopting it for the panel title. And when the ISSB was created, really one of the main objectives of the creation of the organization was to create a truly global baseline of sustainability disclosures, which means companies around the world disclosing in a common way, not necessarily the same thing, right? Because we understand that different entities have different topics, different investors have different needs, but really making sure that we were all speaking a common language around the world. Another reason that the ISSB was created, or I guess I should say as part of this, was the alphabet soup. And I have heard somebody say they want more alphabet soup.
Oh,
I don't know what they were talking. Yeah, it must have been extremely delicious to them. But in the creation of the ISSB itself, for those of you who don't know, it itself was a consolidation of a number of acronyms, including SASB, the IIRC, the Integrated Reporting Council, the CDSB, the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, and also the TCFD, in the sense that the standards are fully incorporating the TCFD recommendations, such that anybody who's applying the TCFD today is already on the pathway. So a lot of the work, just through its creation, has already been sort of streamlining what preparers and investors need to deal with as it relates to communicating to each other on these topics. But, as it relates to our work with Kerstin and her colleagues, this is something that we're doing, really around the world, as we call our building blocks approach. So we're creating what we think is sort of the common language, as I've said, for communicating to investors on sustainability related risks and opportunities. But we are the very first to acknowledge that there are jurisdictions that have policy objectives, such as Europe, and there are other stakeholders that need to be communicated to as well, such as through the use of the GRI. So the common building block approach is really to create this baseline, and we don't mean it in a sort of negative, like lowest common denominator, but really this baseline of language that different jurisdictions and preparers can then build on top of as well.
Got it. One more of the acronyms, GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative. I think it's the most widely used reporting standard on sustainability. Where does that fit in with what you're building, the global baseline, especially given the materiality point and different approaches to materiality? The two
Is that
have.
to me?
It's whoever wants it first.
Well, I'll start since I was just talking. I mean, the ISSB and the GRI have an MOU in place acknowledging that both organizations have a place as it relates to the communication of sustainability-related information to various stakeholders, and that we complement each other in a very meaningful way. And so while we have that MOU in place, there's ongoing work to now figure out the details. And I think, from the ISSB goal, whether it's dialogues with the GRI or with different jurisdictions, we have really two goals, right? One is we want to make sure to reduce double reporting wherever possible. We want this to be a streamlined disclosure landscape for preparers. And number two, we want to make sure that we're not obscuring information that investors should be or need to be using for making investment decisions. So with those two things in mind, that's how we go into conversations with other standard setters like the GRI or Europe or other jurisdictions around the world as well.
So, we at EFRAG, we had a memorandum of understanding with GI. It expired and we're working on a new one. But for us, GI is especially important because the next step in the EU will be that we develop sector-specific standards, and we would like to work with GI on that. But as said, it's not in place, the memorandum of understanding. They are working on it. And regarding our standards, the materiality assessment, I said that already, is the most important part. And we are right now working on guidelines, because that is what we were asked for implementing those, especially materiality assessment and the impact materiality, because financial materiality, we can also see that with the ISSB development. And I think you're also developing guidelines and implementation guidance and everything like that, yes.
Got it. And let's go back to Elizabeth, because you live closer to the SEC's headquarters than you do in Hamburg. How does this relate to the SEC's rule that, again, is delayed in a way that maybe folks are unclear on at this point?
Yeah, well, I have no insider information on that, though I do live just outside of Washington, D.C. And for those of you who don't know, the ISSB board has 3 individuals who are US-based, and the 3 of us also happen to have been on the SASB Standards board together. So I think oftentimes people think of the IFRS Foundation, the ISSB, as sort of outside of the US, but that's in fact not the case. So, no insider information on that, but I'll say a couple things. One is that regardless of what the SEC does, regardless, the ISSB was created to respond to market demand for sustainability-related information and climate-related information specifically. And that's what we're delivering on, right? So we're not waiting for the SEC to do that. No companies are waiting for the SEC. Investors are certainly not waiting for the SEC. I know that they have some complicated work to do. But as it relates to SEC and how we overlap or align or not, one thing I'll say is that as it relates to our exposure draft and their proposed rule that they put out last year, there is a significant amount of overlap, right? We already know both their proposed version, who knows what will end up coming out, and our document use the TCFD as a primary framework. We know that there's the financial materiality component to it. So really, there's sort of like no regrets approach as it relates to the ISSB climate standard and achieving some of the things that we anticipate could be in the SEC final rule. And the second thing that I'll say is, one of the I think the most powerful aspects of the IFRS Foundation which the ISSB is part of, that I didn't recognize because I didn't know anything about it until about a year ago, is that it has extremely deep relationships with jurisdictions around the world, right? So the IFRS Foundation has been writing accounting standards for 20 years now that are used in over 140 jurisdictions around the world. No other organization has that sort of reach as it relates to sustainability issues and relationships with financial regulators. And the SEC is one of others who participate in a jurisdictional working group that we have that meets on a monthly basis to sort of make sure they understand where we're going, why we're doing it, and that sort of thing. Europe is as well. And so it's a really important way to make sure that we achieve as much as possible, as much as the ISSB can have a hand in this, the alignment where it's possible.
Got it. Is there a view from Hamburg?
Well, from the EU perspective, we work with the ISSB, and we were mandated by a law, by the directive, and the directive says we have to pay attention to other jurisdictions or to other developments within the sustainability reporting area, which is obviously ISSB or GI or SASB. Well, you merged, but we look to the SEC, but not that much attention from our perspective. Yes.
Got it. I have a requisite crystal ball question, but it's a lengthier crystal ball, so let's look out 5 years. Ideally, how does a sustainability reporting standard world look in 5 years? You mentioned there still is appetite for soup, but...
I mean, that's just what I heard. I am terrible at crystal balls.
Nice.
So I'm going to duck that question a little bit and say that it doesn't matter what I think, because everything the ISSB does is in response to public consultation, right? And so we actually have 2 public consultations open right this moment and more coming. But the 2 that are open right now one is about the internationalization of the SASB standards. So as I mentioned, the ISSB S1 document requires industry-specific disclosures and requires that companies consider the SASB standards as they're identifying on what they should be reporting. There is a small portion of the SASB standards that currently refer to jurisdiction-specific metrics in the US or whatever the case is. And so we have out for public consultation the methodology for fixing those small places to make sure that's not a barrier to global adoption. And the second consultation is our agenda priorities consultation. I encourage you all to participate in that, where we're looking for market input on what our next priorities should be. And we have a number of projects that we've heard from the market are of interest, including particular topic areas. And we're going to be collecting feedback on that one, I think, don't quote me on this, through September 1st. So we encourage you all to participate in that as well.
Got it.
Well, our agenda is almost set for the next years because we are following the law. So our next steps will be that we develop guidance, as I said, so do capacity building. And we are on our way to develop sector-specific standards. So we have the first one started on oil and gas and coal mining. And we also develop standards for small and medium-sized entities, disclosure for on a voluntary basis and on a mandatory basis. And we then move on with the other sector specific standards, and that is what we want to achieve in the next years. When you ask me where should we be in 5 years, I think we all have the same goal. So we should avoid double reporting and should enhance the reporting or the disclosure on sustainability issues. Yeah.
Well, we've got,
I'd love to add to
Go
what
for
you
it.
said. Yeah, I mean, right now, you actually have a public consultation open right this moment, for the next couple of weeks. And I think this is a really important opportunity for people to sort of have a final word, if I understand it correctly. Yeah. And so, the ISSB encourages all of you all to participate in their public consultation as well. And I think this is an important opportunity to express the desire for this interoperability and this common baseline. So I don't know if you want to say anything more on that, but I know that's important too.
Yeah, the interoperability is a word we heard a lot. So that means that we work together with the ISSB. So especially right now, because you're having out your S2, so the climate standard, and we also work on our E1, which is a climate standard. So we try to align as much as possible to avoid additional cost and to avoid, of course, double reporting. And I hope we will move on with that.
Awesome. Well, we have 43 seconds. Are there any stones that are unturned or any next milestones that the folks should be aware, whether it's on standards that are out or biodiversity standard that may be coming or human capital or other things that you want to now use 31 seconds to share?
Pressure. Yeah, I'll just say, as I said, the standards are here. It's a new beginning, right? So now what we need is the marketplace to adopt the standards, to use the standards. I think another thing that really excites me about the ISSB is we don't just deliver and walk away. We're working now on capacity building. We're working on post-implementation review. We take feedback and we listen to it. So please do that.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I mean, we need support from around the world. So especially when we look for climate, and then we talk about scope 3 emissions and emissions in the value chain, it might also affect companies in the US. So we need support, as said, from all those people and companies.
Fantastic. Well, we're literally exactly on time. Well done, Kerstin. Thank you two so much for setting us on some good footing for the keynote today. And again, reminder, if you have questions, you can ask
me anything
later on. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Thanks.